Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of System Link. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mike Hazelton from the Xbox Guide. Mike, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, yeah, pretty good. You?
Yeah, all good here. Been really looking forward to this episode, particularly because of some of the different topics we've picked as our quick headlines. But tonight, we're going to be deep diving on this week's rather surprising announcement of Halo Studios. The move to Unreal Engine 5 and the fact that this seems to be a major shift in strategy for them. Looking, I think, at Infinite's player numbers. We'll save it, we'll get there. But that's going to be our big deep dive for this evening. But first of all, we've got to get to our headlines. Before we do, though, Big Manny, good evening. Seeing you in chat there. Great to see you, bud, as always. Can I just say as well, I want to just kind of off the bat, Mike, I know you'll support and agree with this as well, but one of our absolute most consistent, best supporters ever since we started doing this. Thank you, Big Manny, for always being that presence in the Discord, in chat, you're a Prime subscriber too, that gifted sub, thanks Mike for that too. But it's really lovely to have you involved in the community, and it's great to see you, man. So yeah, thank you for being here.
100%.
We're going to kick off with kind of a bit of a part 2 from last week when we were talking about Starfield Shattered Space. It's the first premium expansion that Microsoft have released and Bethesda for Starfield. And review sentiment seems to be pretty middling, pretty sort of middle of the road. And I know there's also been quite a bit of sentiment online. Again, it's always tough to judge this when you're just sort of going through your recommended feed. But I get a sense that there isn't a great deal of conversation and enthusiasm around it. I don't really know necessarily what to point to as the reason for that. And that's something that I think is something I wanted to kind of get into with you tonight, and as we cover our headlines. What is it? What is going on with Starfield right now that leads to this sort of apathy that the community seem to have for it?
Yeah, it's a good question. We touched on it last week, but there hadn't quite been enough time since it came out to really judge. Bethesda did the thing that they did with the actual game, where they didn't give it to people to review beforehand. Actually, I don't think they sent any review copies out at all. So all the reviews are purchased by websites and things, which is a bit odd. I think it's just the game launched to relatively poor reception. Certainly, not what was expected. People were hyping it up as if it was going to be the savior of the series consoles. And the amount of time that's passed, I think what they should have done is held the patch content back for the DLC, because for me the big improvement is the vehicles, the city maps, 60 frames. Not 60 frames was more important than I don't think they should have held that back necessarily. But we're going to come on to Vessel of Hatred, the Diablo DLC later on. There's quality of life improvements that are part of that DLC that have kind of launched alongside the DLC, and I think that is a better way to do it. People came back to Starfield because they put vehicles in and because they put the city maps in, and then people are coming back for this, but it's like some people are saying it's 5 hours. I think on the last week's show I said 10 hours, which is what I'd read, but people are saying 5 hours if you kind of blast through it for like 30 quid, isn't it?
30 pound expansion.
DLC, that's asking a lot when there's no new companions or no meaningful new companions. There's no decent like characters in it that you come across. The world they've crafted is the thing that stands out in the reviews, but it's kind of just more of the same as Starfield. And if you've played Starfield for 100 hours, if you were that into it, that you would probably have bought the special edition or wanted to pay extra for the DLC. I just don't think it's anything special
and substantial enough necessarily.
When with Skyrim and Oblivion, can't remember about Fallout, but often the expansions had like new features, new gameplay, completely new gameplay mechanics. Like you could build a house, or I think in one of the Oblivion ones you got a castle and a follower. In Oblivion, the main game, you never got like an NPC follower companion. And I think adding something really meaningful like that is a really good way to kind of motivate people to invest in the DLC. If they'd have locked vehicles behind the DLC, I think they'd have got some flack for it, but it would have been in my opinion, would have been a good decision, because it would have put a bit of hype into the DLC and helped with this. The player numbers, the player numbers of Starfield are quite low. I think most played, it's like still like in the 20s. I think on the Xbox, Steam numbers haven't gone up that much. So fair to say it's not landed how they would have hoped.
It hasn't necessarily moved the needle. This is another case of a game that was, well, the base game being a Game Pass release. This, to me, feels like it should have been the Gears 5 Hivebuster idea, which was that, I mean, in that specific example, though, that was included as part of Ultimate, which I still think was a strange choice. Give the game away, the base game, and part of the sub, and then charge people extra. I thought that was the whole point. The idea is they could monetize that game that was already given for free, quote-unquote free, by having premium DLC. So it is a strange approach. I've seen a few games do that, where they'll launch the free updates alongside the premium content, which means that as that new content
That's the
drops and
best way
everyone's
to do it.
excited for it, yeah, it's the way to generate enthusiasm. You're then ensuring that your player base is satiated because not only are they being looked after with the free content, you're giving people that are hardcore into it an option then to upgrade and pay for more. So it's a great, that to me felt like in terms of balance, I wouldn't necessarily need to put the car or the vehicle behind the paywall. I think it was the release timing that was the mistake. Get that out with Shattered
Yeah, and
Space.
it wasn't that long ago either.
No.
I don't know. Feels like it was only a couple of months ago that they did that. They could have easily held it. Probably they got that team working on the PlayStation version, but I yeah, there's something slightly off with Starfield. I think because they're pushing an engine into new territory that it's not designed for. There's something going on with the studio. I think they're making some strange decisions. Like we said with their release timing. And we've got at least one more big expansion. It feels like it's been rushed, and even though it's a year after the game came out, maybe the game landed in a worse state than I expected.
Yeah,
and
they
the
needed
team
more
that they
time.
wanted to have working on this were fixing the issues with the
Yeah,
game.
I did wonder if
Apparently they said it would never need 60 frames. I can't remember the city maps thing. I think they recognised was just a bit rushed. The vehicles though, they said we don't need vehicles. You're supposed to explore the planets on foot. So those two bits at least are things that, if we are to believe what the studio said, they were never intending to add to the game. So certainly they had to put people on that would have maybe been working. I mean, maybe they're different teams, but
that evokes rare. That evokes rare in Sea of Thieves for me. The notion of not having AI ships and then that being a fundamental design choice to not have them, only to then patch them in several seasons later. It's an interesting dynamic there, where they've clearly, maybe it hasn't landed the way they wanted. Like you said, potentially in a worse state. I do think the performance mode option should have been there from the start, and it wasn't, much like Redfall, similar scenario. The ability for them to course correct and listen is a good thing, but the decision making around when they then drop those updates, I think, was the mistake, and perhaps that's then hurt the DLC. Perhaps people, even though it would have been free alongside Shattered Space, I think it shifted people's perception of the DLC itself, because it's almost like, okay, the thing we actually wanted, the maps, the vehicles, that came for free, and now you're charging us for this. Why is it not then done at the same time? That I do think release timing fundamentally is the issue here.
Plus, you have all the mod content now that's available, so I think there are ways to extend your game if you want to do that. Yeah, and you don't want to buy the DLC. You know, there's mods available that will give you more content. I've seen some people say that because the take up of the special edition or the whatever it's deluxe edition, where you have access to this, was so high that potentially they phoned in the effort they put into it. I mean, we can't possibly make that sort of judgment, but given the pricing of the DLC, I feel like they would have realised take up was going to be quite low. Quite early on, they probably realised that. And if there's loads of people out there with they've already got access to the DLC, I think it may affect their, how much effort they're going to put into it. I for the level of content on offer, I think they could have considered putting it in Game Pass, and I think that would have given the game a new lease of life, and it would have been a good PR story for Bethesda. But then people would have said the reason you're doing that is because it's a bit shit. But I mean, it's launched with glitches and all the usual Bethesda crap as well. So
it's the kind of where do you want to put your optics there? Where do you want the focus to be?
Yeah.
If you know that people are going to be criticizing that for feeling like some sort of half-baked experience, then including it in Game Pass would actually hurt the service more than anything. So it's a rock and a hard place in a sense. I do think that having a premium expansion on paper isn't the issue. There isn't a problem with them taking a game that already is given away on the sub and creating premium content for it. I think that's smart. It's a great way to get additional revenue and also keep a title alive. Conceptually, not a problem. The choice of timing and perhaps the lack of ambition might be something that's perhaps holding people back and giving it that slightly more tepid response than obviously they would have wanted. It's a very strange one.
I think the pricing, they committed to the price straight. As soon as the deluxe edition was revealed, and they had this upgrade cost, and they had to commit to a certain price for the expansion. Um, and I think if people were rabid for Starfield content, maybe it would have landed better. But because the
Yeah.
game was lukewarm, had a lukewarm reception, people just weren't that bothered and aren't willing to spend 35 quid on it.
It's tough. It's a really tough situation again for them to find a sort of a big first party release. It was a huge section of their calendar going into the end of the year, particularly with the Avowed delay. I don't want to say Towerborn. Have I made that up?
No Towerborn. Oh,
Towerborn.
on consoles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Console being delayed and PC going straight into early access on Steam. There's been a couple of quite high-profile delays out of there with Indie now going to PS5 as well. So there's been a few. I feel like there's been a few hits. Ara was
I'm
always,
not a,
Sorry, go on.
I'm not a fan of them putting DLC in their roadmap as a like a big release.
As a release.
Yeah, I don't like that much.
Kind of needs a Clabreel second section, doesn't it? In like the artwork
Yeah.
he produces, it needs an extra bit.
Especially for something of this side. Vessel of Hatred will come onto, which seems like a different case. But for this, where it's like a new world, 5 hours of gameplay.
Well, then I think it's down to how substantial it is, right? To take Vessel of Hatred, obviously, I know that's something we're going to be talking about. We might as well segue. It's a really sort of, it's almost polar opposite from what I've seen. People's response to it, the offering behind
Yeah,
it.
it's had really good reviews.
The review content has been stellar for it. It's yet again Diablo continuing to, I think, actually play to their top end players. They're playing to those people that have put the 100 hours in. I don't think this is a play to get people talking about Diablo again. I don't actually think that was the impetus. I think it was, let's look after our core contingent that love this, that have seen us through all of the seasonal updates, they've done all the optional extra missions. Now let's introduce, obviously, as it's showing here, the new region, new class, having players actually then want to have a reason to come back. Starfield, I think, was actually about them perhaps misunderstanding what people were wanting from it. And clearly the response to the vehicle and the maps was significantly more positive than what we've seen out of Shattered Space. It just seems backwards to be in terms of the priority of the response we've had.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're supposed to be talking about Diablo, but I guarantee more people came back to Starfield for the vehicle than...
Absolutely.
Or, maybe they want to get their money's worth, so they come for Shattered Space, but I don't think they'll have stuck around as they would have done when the vehicle landed.
This, as part of the Activision Blizzard buyout, I think Diablo is probably one of the most valuable IP that they've taken. Call of Duty is an obvious one. World of Warcraft obviously will just continue doing its thing and eventually come to console, I would imagine. Diablo has just been this, juggernaut. It's by far the best-selling game in the series. It's got the best player retention. The seasonal updates seem to be really meaningful as well. In some ways, a ultimate contrast to what Shattered Space was offering. This obviously being, the next seasonal chunk for something that's been going on for a lot longer and yet has generated such a fervent enthusiasm, which is, again, just to see this being so well supported by a team that's clearly passionate about putting something substantial together. It's really great to see. I mean, actually, so this is the first time I'd actually seen this footage. And I mean, we said this before when we played it. The cutscene design is outstanding in this game. Some of the best motion capture and writing work I've seen, especially in a title like this, where you wouldn't expect the emphasis to be on those elements. And yet, they have delivered consistently every single season. Really dynamic storytelling, great performances, and a polish that I think a game like this needs in order to, you're essentially, it's not live service, but being the kind of seasonal update game, there is elements of live service in there, I suppose. It's not as reactive as, say, a multiplayer competitive title, but it's an ongoing game. I suppose that's probably a better description.
Yeah.
And for it to retain a player base and interest, it's going to need to be something worthwhile.
Yeah. Exactly, that's what I was going to say. The difference to Starfield is the player base of this that have stayed invested in the game is ridiculous for a game where you're essentially there's a lot of repetition. If you want to, Phil Spencer's got, I think, 350 hours on it, and you're going to be repeating yourself a lot for that. So I think when you know already that you're going to have all these eyes on your expansion content, and potentially you're going to, if it hits the spot, you're going to get all this revenue. Starfield, if Shattered Space had landed amazing, had 10 out of 10 reviews, it wouldn't have sold any more copies of Starfield. It was never, it was always going to be a limit to how much they were going to make from this. Whereas best of hatred. There's so many copies of Diablo out there, so many engaged people playing it that if they get it right, which they seem to have, it can do really well.
For sure. And
And I
actually,
think yeah,
that's where the Game Pass inclusion makes a huge difference as well. Because suddenly people see this, they
yeah,
see a polished update. Maybe they tried it at launch, maybe put 10 hours in. Seeing something like this makes them go, well, great, I can just get it on console or PC to download this and get in. That's a win in every
yeah.
sense, isn't it? So, now, complete left turn, switching gears to, well, I'll say it. What the hell's going on with Ubisoft at the moment? Some really, really bizarre rumors and speculation circling them in terms of their company structure, a potential buyout. I know Tencent have gotten involved with them. That makes me very nervous, by the way. Tencent and Embracer. I see either of those names pop up, and I just think, well, they, when you read these stories and they buy like a 40% stake, 31% stake in a company, not enough for the
They
total ownership.
invest in
but
Remedy, don't they? Your
I
friends
know,
at
and
Remedy?
it made me both excited for the fact that Control 2 is now completely set and it's going to have a future. Without issue, not reliant on another publisher. Well, they're self-publishing, aren't they? Control 2, but they've definitely invested in the studio. Just makes me nervous. I wasn't that long ago. We saw Tencent making a couple of chops, and Embracer obviously being the worst for that. I don't know whether I'd want Ubisoft to be falling under their banner, just given their history of culling. Ubisoft is a massive operation as well. It's probably the one down from studios like 2K and Activision in terms of scope. You sort of see the number of logos that pop up at the start of an Assassin's Creed game, and you'll see just how many studios they have contributing to their big titles. Is it a necessary evil, do you think, that they're going to require this in order to remain viable?
I don't think so. I mean, there was a time when Ubisoft were as big as EA
Yeah,
for a short time.
yeah.
Um,
Prince of
as
Persia
the
era,
reason
I'd
I
say. Prince of Persia.
yeah I associate them quite closely because Ubisoft put games on everything. They were developing individual games for Nintendo consoles
Mm.
in a way that EA did for a short period. Um, the share price went down a lot, which I think is what got everyone worried when they delayed Assassin's Creed, and when they said that it was because Outlaws didn't meet expectations, and it went up again when people started talking about Tencent. But I'd be more worried from a quality point of view if they sold to Tencent, because that would suggest to me that Ubisoft, as they are now, don't have confidence in the
Mm.
games that are coming up. Because if they are sure that Assassin's Creed is going to do really well, then they don't need to sell to Tencent, because Assassin's Creed will come out, it will sell big numbers, and that will improve. The problem is they've had a few bad
Thank you. I'm glad you
um,
mentioned that, because that was what I was just thinking
situations.
about that. It's actually, when you really look at it, there's been a run now of very high profile, I imagine also extremely expensive to develop titles that, generally speaking, underperformed. You had Avatar at the end of last year, Skull and Bones, which was just an unmitigated disaster, and now Outlaws has underperformed relative to their targets. And that is soft sales. 1 million for a Star Wars game, the first open world RPG. Reviews definitely hurt it, I think, for sure. And that's sort of like, there's always those ridiculous, the loud idiots that talk about the main character and her appearance and all of that. I mean, that I can't imagine would have had any impact, but the reviews certainly would have done. And that's a run. That's December to sort of mid of this year to Outlaws coming out during the summer. That's a rough
Yeah, I
triple
mean,
hit of AAA misses.
Outlaws. I am surprised, even despite the again lukewarm reviews. I'm surprised Outlaws has sold so few.
Mm.
I think if that was on Game Pass, it would have been insane engagement with that.
Yeah, I agree.
I would have played it for sure.
I'd love to
Skull and
know.
Bones was
So I was just going to say, I'd love to know the Ubisoft Plus
yeah.
numbers relative to actual sales, because it's 1 million players. Very key messaging on that. Would love to know where that needle falls on there. Sorry, you were going to say about Skull and Bones as well.
Skull and Bones. Well, the first two, Avatar and Skull and Bones were just bad decision making. I don't think anyone wanted an Avatar game as much as it was like the best looking game ever, and was reviewed quite well. I just don't think there was a demand for an Avatar game, so I
I
don't
agree.
know why they agreed to do that. And then once you've agreed to do it, you can go the route of doing a relatively mediocre licensed game. But they put so much effort into that Avatar game, such that it was the best looking game before Hellblade 2 or whatever. Um, and then no one bought it because no one wanted it. And Skull and Bones should have been cancelled 6 years ago, 6 years before
Yeah.
it came out. I played it; it was bad. You know.
Yeah, so did I. I played very briefly the beta on PlayStation, and I did not stick around because it just didn't. It was a mess of UI design, monetization, and then just really boring combat. You can't. I don't think you could just take the Assassin's Creed naval combat from those 3 games and just dump it in its own franchise.
Just release that as a £20 like digital
Nonsense
game thing.
For it to be 70 quid. I mean,
then he said it's quadruple A as well.
Which, by the way, put that term in the bin. I heard the Initiative talk about that in relation to Perfect Dark, and I'm like, guys, you're getting Crystal Dynamics to help you make this game. Let's knock off an A. Let's stick with the triple because.
Well, it's interesting because I think there could be a place for that term for a game where like Battlefield, or Call of Duty, where you have multiple studios, more than just Crystal Dynamics are helping, but multiple studios. Making a game where there's going to be like 1,000 people that have worked on it. But
Assassin's
I don't like the
Creed
term,
maybe because at the scope of the franchise and the multiple studios, I think there'd be room for that. I just don't like the term. I think it's marketing guff. I think it's just
lame. And if Skull and Bones came into that category, it's because they fucked it up and they needed people to come in and help. It wasn't because it was
they had to just throw human suffering at it for like 6 years and then it didn't work out. It was bad release timing, bad monetization model. The game itself, and maybe that's where Star Wars Outlaws ended up with a kind of middling reviews, is that the gameplay itself then wasn't able to sell the product. It wasn't able. When Star Wars can't shift the needle in terms of sales.
I don't understand it, to be honest.
That's a tough one, and we also can't. Those again fairly sort of limited thinking idiots would say like, oh, it's franchise fatigue. People are bored of Star Wars, like they're out of the MCU. All you have to do is look at Respawn's Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor and how those games. They just released an Xbox One version of Jedi Survivor, which I imagine looks and runs like sin, but actually, from what I saw on pure Xbox, it seems to actually 1080p 30 on the last gen and seems to look and run okay. They have done incredibly well with that series, so much so that they've said, well, the next one's coming. It will be the last in the trilogy, but the next one is cooking as a next gen only proposition. That just shows the hunger for that license is still there. Star Wars Bounty Hunter just got re-released recently.
Games are different. Like I think you can have fatigue of the shows. I think that's fair enough. But I think games are a completely different proposition, and especially when all the shows are all filmed in a very similar way and very similar mood, and if games just feel different, and all the Star Wars games that we've had are all completely different games. I don't think unless you're literally people are fatigued with Call of Duty because there's one every year. I can understand that, but
sure,
they're essentially the same game every year. It's just not the case for Star Wars. So,
well, I think ultimately the delay for Assassin's Creed was smart, but the reason they stated as to why is dumb. I don't think it has anything to do with Outlaws underperforming. Surely you would want the next guaranteed bet before Christmas. Sure, if that was the sole purpose. Again, it makes me worried that they didn't have confidence to release it. And I think they want to address some of the historical things that people jumped on with the reveal trailer, which also is a concern. Like, fair enough if there are actual historical inaccuracies, but I worry that they're like toning down some of the woke. We should really hope that they just make the game they want to make, and I find all that stuff as a sort of a nonsense argument, but
it's so prevalent. Not that stuff in games, just that being the argument. But we've had
countless
female protagonists in games going back decades, and
it's almost like a position that can't be argued. You'd think this is something that we've already solved, and yet it keeps coming up. whenever there's a new title or a high-profile delay, we find ourselves in a position where we're having to debate these, well, as far as I was concerned, non-issues, and yet it's still a thing. Don't know where that leads in terms of
I've
their
got more on
viability.
that.
Yeah, that's good.
I've got more on that to talk about later on, but
we're getting there. So a title that I don't really have any sort of connection to, and I was really curious actually to get your thoughts on this because I've seen it blowing up, was Metaphor. We Fantasia. Was just with I have no background with this series at all, or the developer, and for me it was just really curious what your take was on this, and why is this something that people are getting so fired up about?
Yeah, I have no background with them. It's a new, so it's kind of a spiritual successor to the Persona series.
Yeah.
Which I hadn't played, in a minority of having not played it. And traditionally, it wouldn't be my sort of genre. I've played very few JRPGs, basically Final Fantasy VII, which I loved, but I've never been able to get into any since. I've tried a few here and there, Dragon Quest and things, but because there was a free demo basically, and I saw that people were kind of hyped for it. They showed a trailer for it at TGS, and Microsoft have the marketing rights for it, which is unusual. And all the PlayStation fans were getting cross because people were thinking it's come to Game Pass or it's Xbox exclusive, which obviously isn't on either.
That's funny.
Count. I love that there's a demo available. I think it's 5-hour demo before the game came out, which I get talking about Star Wars Outlaws or Assassin's Creed, even the confidence to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
From a developer who they probably have enough kudos from Persona that they don't need a demo. All the Persona fans are going to buy it,
but they've done it anyway.
But for a non-Persona fan, this has given me the chance to try it out, and I found it really engaging, really approachable for someone that isn't necessarily into the genre. The story's fantastic, characters are really good, music and menu design, which you can see a bit of the kind of UI here. Apparently, those are things that Atlas and the Persona series are really well known for, but they're exceptional.
They're very stylized, I noticed as well in there, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I've seen Digital Foundry kind of criticizing the presentation, which I think is fair. Like, it doesn't look like a current gen game particularly, but I don't know. It just works. It's not really an issue for me. It feels like you're kind of playing I guess, as it's supposed to be, like a reimagination of a game that was really popular, 5-10 years ago. So I think, there's really linear sections. It's not massively open or anything, and it feels a bit dated in that respect. But it suits the genre and the tone of the game perfectly.
That's nice to hear.
I know you generally. So I was just going to say, I know you generally this wouldn't be your thing. I'd encourage you just to try it to see if the story resonates with you, because it kind of just got me hooked really early on.
That's really good to hear, because that, I think, would have been the thing I'd need to be able to give it a shot or to try and connect with it. It's either, and I found myself definitely certainly as I've gotten older, the feel of a game mechanically and or the story are the two things that really hook me in, because the story then ties in with the acting and writing, the feel to do with controls and like mechanics, like interacting with the world. Those are the things that really get me into games. I don't really care about the genre or graphics particularly in just, I won't just get a game because it has this visual style or suits this particular genre. So actually hearing you say that does make me a little bit more willing to give something like that a shot, because I really don't have any history with it at all, or this type of game. Obviously I know it's a newer approach. It seems as well that the best elements of those games are often where they're not trying to pander necessarily to a new audience. They know what audience they're targeting with this, and I think that actually there is value in that, in sort of knowing what title you're making and making them well. If Atlas has a history of producing games like this, play to the strength, especially if they're able to then. Is it a new IP?
Yeah, a new IP.
Oh, that's really cool. Really cool to have something that then, because I would look at some of those the combat overlays, and that would be quite off-putting to me because it looks quite busy and it looks quite complex.
It is very busy.
Right.
Yeah.
Is it so busy that you feel like I have no idea what the hell's going on right now?
No, it works well with the. I think because the graphics are quite average, you kind of have these like UI flourishes and things that kind of make up for some of the graphical deficiencies. And I think everything is introduced very slowly to the extent that I'm probably like 3 hours in, and they're adding quite a lot now, and I think it's just about at the right pace, but it starts really slowly. So if you're kind of new to the genre, it's not overwhelming.
Nice. Is it
yeah.
voice acted?
And yeah,
is it voice acted or is it just text?
Yeah, yeah. So it's English or Japanese. I mean, I normally go for Japanese voice acting in these, and it's good. And the translation's really good.
They added that to Ghost of Tsushima. They had a mode in that where you could have the subtitle text, and I definitely want to, when I get the Pro, I want to definitely go back and play Tsushima properly and do it like that. Because
cool.
I'm the same. I really like being immersed in that. It's why I love Shogun, TV series Shogun, so much, is that I want to be immersed in that world, and that's a great way, I think, to do that. I remember playing... completely different genre, but I played Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3. It was the Switch exclusive sequel, which was the top-down Marvel game that was co-op. And I remember playing it, and with my stepdaughter, we did the co-op split screen together on Switch, and it was just... there was so much action, even more so than... you remember the old Dynasty Warriors games? Well, the combat was just crazy. The difference with this, though, is I could not tell you what I was actually doing. It was so complex visually and so messy that they sort of, as you're doing combos and enemies are getting hit here and then this character's doing an area of effect attack, it became so unintelligible that instantly we both just went, we're out. So I think that would be something I would be looking at the footage. That's something I would be concerned about, that it would become too sort of complex visually.
So this might have been in Persona, I don't know, so people have to excuse my ignorance. You have an option to fight in real time with X, basically. Or an option to press Y and then you go into like a turn-based traditional JRPG squad thing, which is where you get the overlays and everything. Yeah. Because you take your go and it hits, and then you get some like overlay flashes and stuff. So it's not like in the heat of battle you've got all these things, all these.
Oh, okay. Because that's what happened in that. Is it was just you were in the thick of it, and it was so impossible to track what was happening. And so it's quite nice. So you use the X mode. I think you hold left trigger and it will tell you if the enemy coming up, if you've encountered that enemy before, is like at your level, lower than your level, or higher than your level. And if it's higher, then you generally do the turn-based thing. And if it's lower, then you just go in and like attack them in real time, and you can dodge in real time and stuff. So it's not massively like a throwaway option. It's quite satisfying to do. But yeah, so in that mode, the UI is just like a standard third-person action UI, really. It's when you go into the turn-based bit that they throw all the extra stuff, and kind of giving you your XP at the end of the battle is a really nice, quite busy menu, but it looks really cool. Nice.
And it's not really an issue because it's in this turn-based bit.
It's separated from the real-time stuff. So the demo, I think, is a really great play by them. And that's a great way. It's obviously gotten you willing to give it a shot as well, and willing to try it. So.
And seeing the reviews come in now, I think it's like 94 Metacritic. So I'd be very tempted to get it.
Is it on?
Certainly
Is it current gen?
Sorry. Is it? Yeah.
As in, is it Switch as well? Is it handheld, or is it?
I don't know. I don't know about
Xbox,
Switch.
PlayStation, PC.
I don't know about Switch. Sorry.
Okay, it's interesting. But interesting though, if it is still just sort of current gen consoles. Is it cross gen as well? Do we know if it's on the previous?
I don't think so.
Interesting, because it does look quite crisp though. It does look quite crisp visually, so I think it might struggle. You're doing a live fact check.
Considering Digital Foundry said it's struggling on
true.
Yeah, it might be. The problem when a game is called Metaphor is that it's really hard to search for quickly.
Yeah, the definition of metaphor.
Confusing. Apparently it's on PlayStation 4, but not on last gen Xbox.
Oh, okay. But it's on Series X.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay. Curious. Well, speaking of PlayStation and some extremely well-received remakes, one that actually I didn't have a huge amount of confidence that would do well, but has clearly done the numbers, was Silent Hill 2. That remake had been cooking for a while. Bloober Team coming in after having created the Medium, which was a timed Xbox exclusive before going to PlayStation.
This had terrible sentiment before release. Like, people had written this off. People had written off Bloober Team. It's like, oh, you can't have like Western.
Don't
Western
give it to them like that. It would be like, you know, it's like giving the ukulele studio banjo. Don't do it.
And they kind of demoed it, or there was like gameplay trailers, and people were like they've ruined it. And then the reviews have come out, and it's like, it's amazing,
absolutely barnstorming, yeah.
And this never happens, that you get like poor sentiment before release, and the game comes out, and everyone's like, oh, it's incredible.
Yeah, because typically it would be, well, I told you this exactly what it was going to be like. The stuff I'd seen, people comparing it to like the Resident Evil remakes, which are so well regarded. But I think what they've done, what really got me with this was the preservation of the visual style, the classic fog, right? Like, that was always the identifiable graphic in that, and certainly something that at the time it was a performance limitation of the hardware that they turned into something atmospheric. And for them to have specifically retained that feel, certainly in those outdoor areas, you know, the sort of busy, sort of the empty streets that you'd walk down, before going into a very sort of Evil Within style, close up, over the shoulder camera view and visual fidelity. This is really how you do a remake. I'd put this on par with like the Dead Space remake in terms of quality and justification for a re-release, I think.
Well, I think it's similar in that they've redesigned, you know, there's boss fights that they've removed, boss fights they've completely redesigned, bits of the game they've taken out, new bits they've put in. It's similar to Dead Space, where it's not like a one-to-one recreation with nicer graphics. As much as they've kept the visual style and the kind of, certainly the feel of the game, they've completely, you know, made it suitable for current gen audiences, which I think is why people were a bit worried originally, and I guess that's kind of
that it would take too many steps away from what they're familiar with, and that was always the concern with the Resident Evil remakes, which I think is certainly the response to 4, which was always actually mechanically a little bit of an awkward game to play, and a lot of the changes they made to 4 for Resident Evil were to address those issues. This seems to be that they've sort of done a really nice job, much like Bluepoint do for a lot of the remakes they did, like with Demon Souls. Retain what was special, but make it modern. Make it for now. And this goes beyond just a remaster. This is a full-blown, from the ground up remake. No question. And it just seems to be really connecting at a time where I don't feel like there's been a huge amount of survival horror, other than, say, Resident Evil, with its sort of yearly remakes, or every sort of couple of years having a revisit. We haven't seen a huge amount in this genre in recent sort of months, so I think it's come at just the right time. It's targeted that audience that's clearly hungry.
I'm pleased for the team as well, because I think after the Medium, I think their stock was probably at quite a low point, and this has really done them some favours. So it'll be interesting to see if they kind of continue down this path, because they've done such a good job of this, or if they carry on with their own IP.
Would love it if it was a Toys for Bob style situation where they did the Crash trilogy, proved viability of that, and then they got the keys to make their own Crash game. Crash 4 is great, and it's lovely for them to have proven viability with either a remaster or, in this case, a remake. So what a great entry point to prove that your team is ready to handle something like that. Maybe we could see ourselves, see it being a situation where they're making a direct sequel to Silent Hill 2. Not a remake of the other titles, or a sequel beyond where we're at the end of the series, much like Coalition are doing with Gears. They're not continuing the Gears 5 story. They're going back and doing a Gears E-Day. Yeah. We could see a sequence of sequels there too. Wouldn't be surprised if we get a direct Silent Hill 2 sequel that's its own thing, either as an offshoot story or again remaking one of the previous titles, but then very much being given the keys to that castle, which is exciting. Excited for them.
And this is a PlayStation PC exclusive as well, isn't it? Which is a good one for Sony.
A really important get when, especially coming off of Concord. I think that the Astrobot and Silent Hill 2 1-2 punch was a very smart, judicious kind of release timing, given that a lot of the sentiment around what happened with Concord is extremely negative. So good timing for them. But now this, our final headline for this evening before we get to our Halo deep dive, is a announcement that came out of nowhere. I was not prepared to see Alien Isolation 2 be given the green light, with Creative Assembly behind at the helm as well. They're the studio behind the first game. I absolutely adore Alien Isolation. It's one of the most terrifying and involving game experiences I think I've ever had. That systemic AI that would be genuinely reactive to your behavior. One of the rare moments where a back-of-the-box bullet point actually translated to your experience in a game. Lots of panicked moments hiding under a table or hiding in a locker as this horrifically well-programmed AI hunted me down. To get a current gen only, maybe Unreal Engine, I think the first game was Unreal Engine, to get a UE5 version of this, I would be surprised if we also see a remaster, because obviously it's going to be I wouldn't expect 2 could end up being a cross-gen game, but I could see a remaster of this coming out to gauge interest and to drum up a bit of excitement for the series again. They've been doing a really nice job, I think, lately, just with the IP. We had Dark Descent, the top-down tactical game. We had Fireteam Elite, third-person World War Z style sort of horde shooter. They've done some really nice offshoot titles with this franchise, and given the recent Alien Romulus, which, by the way, saw in the cinema a couple of weeks ago and shit my pants. It was really, really well done. Top 3 Alien film. Top 3, I think, would be third for me, behind Alien at number 2 and Aliens, the second film, at number 1. This franchise is in a good spot. I think they're having a bit of a resurgence right now. Great timing for Creative Assembly to capitalize on this, and I cannot wait. That shot there just popped up with the motion tracker, which you either have that out or a torch out. It was so well done, so good.
It captured the spirit of the film so well, and also was so simple, and I think like daringly simple.
Yes.
Premise for a game, like they didn't overdo it. It's very, very straightforward, and
totally
I couldn't play this. It's too much for me. I know it's too much. So,
too much for me.
It's come back. I think it's I think it's 10 years since this came out, which is why it's back. So, really good news.
Just great, and I think it's nice that Creative Assembly. I don't know. I'd love to look into how it's sold. I don't know whether it was sort of... I don't think it underperformed, but I think it was a softer sales release. It's had a longer tail, because they did have some DLC for it as well that came out afterwards, that tied in with some of the films, which is really cool.
It was all single player, wasn't it?
Yep, single player only.
Oh, it feels like it's tailor-made for a mode where someone plays the Xenomorph.
Yeah. The sequel, we could see that. I think I would not be surprised if...
Not as the sole premise. I think definitely there should be a single player where it's the same AI that's in this game, but as a multiplayer mode where human player controls the
perhaps
alien would be
not narrative either. It's an objective based thing. You're trying to get a squad from A to B.
Yeah.
And if they added campaign co-op, would you join me?
Oh, definitely, yeah. It's fine in co-op. I just can't do it on my own.
But then we've had a couple of I remember playing Dead Space 3 with you, and the combat sort of in that game became a bit repetitive. It really killed the experience for us. But I do remember those first few hours of playing that cooperatively with you, and I loved that. And I think we've got a couple of titles, haven't we? There's Reanimal coming out 2025 that I think will be a really, really cool co-op experience, and Little Nightmares as well. So we've got some stream fodder. That's some Burly Bird Live. Now on Saturdays at 9 p.m. That could very much...
Not this week.
But not this week. Not this week. Family stuff going on. There's some potential there in the future. But just excited to see where this series goes. And it was one of my favourite games of last gen. So I was so chuffed to see this come back with the same team behind it as well. They deserve another shot at this game. So
Sega have got a lot going on. Bringing back a lot of legacy IP. I mean, you can't really call this legacy IP, but it's good. I'm pleased to see, because there was a time when people talking about Microsoft buying Sega and things like that. It's nice to see them kind of companies like Sega. I think as you see with Nintendo, what they do so well is they lean into their nostalgia IP so well. And Sega, I think, was trying to do too much new stuff. This is a situation where it worked for them, but I think definitely play into their strengths.
Yeah, for sure. And this, by the way, I remember we never ever really spoke about this on stream or anything, but my experience playing this series was that it had such sustained intensity. You weren't being hunted the whole time. In fact, the alien's absence was very smartly done. And in fact, it was his non-presence that was the thing that was the most scary, because you'd hear the crawling in the vents. You knew at any point that AI director could just dump him down in front of you, and it happened to be a bunch. I hope I have a clip of it somewhere. I'll see if I can dig it out sometime and share it through Burly Bird. Of me going down a corridor and him landing directly in front of me but facing away. And I had to slowly back away with my motion tracker out like this, with it like panicking at me, and then run into another room, lock it. He then burst through, and I was hiding in a locker by that point. It was just wonderfully well constructed systemic tension, and just, yeah, loved every minute. Loved aging while playing that game. So we're going to go into our deep dive. This was an extremely strange week for Halo and Microsoft. We haven't talked about this offline. Saved it for System Link. I think... Can I give you, just before we dive in, can I just give you what I like and what I didn't? Just as an overview, because then you'll be able to go, yeah, absolutely, or what the hell? And we kind of play it like that. Unreal Engine 5 Switch, best decision they could have made. Get rid of slip space. Yeah, UE5 is going to make multiple games being developed at the same time, which they've announced is what they're doing. It's going to make spin-off games possible, which is great, because some of the best Halo I've played has been the spin-offs, ODST and Reach. So, brilliant. Anything that's going to allow you to actually make the games look crisp and look really strong and be easier to develop, that's a win. Brilliant.
Easier to port to PlayStation.
That's definitely going to be coming up, because I'm nervous about that, just from a brand identity perspective. But that's definitely got to be in their minds, surely, right? Certainly not for launch. I don't think we're going to see a multi-platform release day and date, but I think that would allow it to have like an exclusivity period and go elsewhere. I think if that happens, I think that's the time when Xbox aren't making any more consoles as well. I think if that's the kind of scenario we're in, if Halo, Forza, and Gears are able to go multi-plat, well then, don't know. Anyway, that's another deep dive. But Unreal Engine 5, really, really pleased with that Switch. Multiple games being confirmed, absolutely. Great idea. Have multiple irons in the fire. I think that's a really smart thing. There have been huge changes at 343 Industries, not obviously limited to their name, now becoming Halo Studios. I like the brand. I think it's clean. I saw a really funny clip of someone from IGN going, well, the name change is a good idea because, what the hell did 343 mean? It was like, it's Guilty Spark. It's
I saw it. Like, Jesus.
What the hell are you doing? You're
not even qualified to talk about Halo.
Hell, on an Xbox podcast. It was Xbox Unlocked. I was like, what the hell are you doing? I think it was Destin Legary. I think it was from IGN.
It was.
What the hell? So that's great. There was a bit in the video where they showed the sort of, I think it was at a tournament, wasn't it, that they released this, where they mentioned about, hey, we got this new approach. We've been cooking with the old recipe with Halo Infinite. Let's try something new. We're looking for some artists and some designers, and it was a really strange job advert for the studio. Okay. Don't announce your rebooted approach to this series and go, we're staffing up. That to me just says we're not seeing this for 5 years. It's too early. They needed something. I think that was a bad way of handling that. That made me eye roll more than anything, because we've seen so much change to their management, and there's been so many high profile shifts in their structure as a company. Not least of which, obviously, the brand change that we mentioned. I think that was odd, and I almost feel like Halo deserves more fanfare than a bunch of pretty landscapes as well. So as much as you're showing off how great Unreal Engine 5 is, I find that very difficult to get excited about what that looks like when you just said, oh, well, we're making familiar places from Halo look pretty again. That, to me, isn't, I don't think, a great way of getting me on board and excited about what's to come. I feel like you should have just waited until you had a title for something. Let's attach our silly brains to a brand for something. You brand it a New Dawn without telling us what the sunrise looks like. And that's tough.
It's interesting because when the slip space engine was kind of revealed, that's what we got for Halo Infinite, wasn't it? We got like environments. Mm-hmm. We didn't see anything about the game. It was just like there were some animals running through
and some
green
Marines, and then
field.
like they showed like a warthog going over some
Yeah,
hills, and then it panned up to the one of the Forerunner things
yeah.
shooting
So
into the sky.
it was similar, but there was more definitely more purpose behind that than
Well, it had
there
a
was about
name.
this.
It had a name too. Halo
Yeah.
Infinite was announced in that trailer, so we had it.
Um,
Yeah.
I lastly feel similar to you. I didn't watch the extended thing. I literally just watched the actual game
Mm.
in engine footage from it. So I am not kind of colored by the because I generally hate those sort of things. It's like what's this 10-minute video for 30 seconds of in engine
Mm.
footage. Um, I was reading that apparently they are heavily reliant on contractors. When I worked at Microsoft, it was the same. Like there was a very small percentage of people that actually worked for them, and I think in certain places there's a limit on how long contractors can be employed by the same company before you have to hire them
Okay.
permanently. So people were saying that with the proprietary engine, you have to train these contractors. By the time they get good with it, they have to leave, and then you have to get new contractors in that you have to train. Well, if it's UE5, you just say if you've got experience with UE5.
Let's get you in.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, ideally they would have just fixed the contractor issue, but um, people suggesting that it could be a remake of the first Halo, which I think would, for me, that is what I would want to see. I think that
Right.
if they can get that out for the launch of the next console, which is realistic
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, because they don't have to work on a story, it should be feasible. I think it's very important. We've talked about it before for the launch of the next console to have a Halo game there because they fucked it up with Infinite.
Yeah.
Um, and it would give people confidence in the studio again because hopefully they'd knock it out the park with UE5 behind it, and then do a new Halo
Mm.
game. And I think I'm hoping that's what the multiple projects would be.
Yes, that's
Um,
where that makes sense to me. I think if it was the only thing they were working on, that would be disappointing for me. I don't want to just have to retread just because you've got
yeah,
a pretty new engine. I think do that absolutely alongside either the next mainline title or another spin-off. Have those multiple
but
irons cooking.
it needs to be a remake for me, in the sense not like in the Master Chief Collection or
In
whatever
the
it was
Silent Hill 2 sense.
yeah, not in the terms of you can filter and go back to the old
Mm.
graphics. I want it to be they've built it from the ground up.
Yes. In
So
UE5.
we know, yeah, so we know we can get a feel for the skills of this what is almost a new studio
Yeah.
really, and how they're going to do for the next Halo, and it'll be a good kind of getting them familiar with how the gun should feel and how the Warthog should feel, and if you've got all these new staff coming in, it's just like we want to make a Halo game. There's a danger that, especially being in a new engine, that they'll struggle to get that feel right. But if their first project is kind of a one-to-one recreation of the first Halo, I think we could
Mm.
be then confident that they can handle
They could deliver what's
the next
next,
game in the
right?
series
Yeah.
properly. My concern is that multiple projects is Halo single player, Halo multiplayer. That's like the cynical way that I read
Oh,
that
right.
statement.
Yeah.
That because I think they'll separate them again
Yeah, it's like
in the
multiple
next
projects
game.
instead of multiple titles. I think the wording, you want it to be multiple games. I think being worked on there, and having them staff up, having a management shift, I think is a great way for them to make that a reality potentially.
Yeah.
I don't. I like you. I also don't particularly like sort of lots of talking heads and sort of it gave me EA talking about what was going to become Jedi Fallen Order, the first Respawn Star Wars game, and there was one E3 where they just showed like concept art of a droid. They're like, we cannot wait to show you more, and it's like, show us more
Battlefield's
now.
done that as well. It's like
Too early.
you're just in dice, and they've just got like a still image on a monitor, and everyone's like zooming in on it to see what they can see. And
Zooming
it's
in to
just
see the pixelated, zoomed version of a terrible bit of key art, and you're like, okay. So I don't
yeah,
I don't put a great deal of stock into an announcement like this because it feels like a bit of a non-event. There isn't a product to attach my interest to yet, but I think
yeah,
as a way to wipe the slate clean, it had a bit of a Peter Molyneux shitting on his last project because his next project's going to be great energy, which was that Halo,
yeah,
the quote, Halo Infinite was the last, was us cooking with our old recipe. Now we're cooking with a new one. And Halo
yeah,
Infinite was supposed to, don't forget, that's a 10-year proposition
Well,
that
this
was abandoned.
yeah, big call to get rid of the engine because although I think all the Halo games have essentially been built with it was kind of reimagined for Halo Infinite,
Yes.
which was supposed to sustain Xbox for
Which
a
got the
long a
feel
decade.
right. You mentioned about the feel of if they go down the remake path, they're making sure they get that spot on. Infinite did that. They 343 in its previous form did show they understood the feel of Halo.
So that from that perspective, like as good as it is moving to UE5, and I think it's certainly the best decision. You wonder if there's issues with how difficult the existing engine is to work with.
Yes.
They really weren't far off with Halo Infinite. To
Right.
the extent that you wonder, what is it worth them getting rid of that? And it is nice to feel to have games feel different. And something we've criticized Unreal Engine for in the past is like Xbox 360 generation. You can just look at it and say that's an Unreal
That's a
game.
UE5 game. Yeah.
Because they all use the same assets and stuff. But my problem with Halo Infinite was just the execution of certain aspects. Multiplayer was executed badly, but felt great. Single player felt great, but wasn't enough variety. And obviously they were lambasted for that trailer that basically caused the game to be delayed.
And the fact that it was feature incomplete as well. Like there was no Forge, there was no campaign co-op,
split screen.
No split screen. I mean that's inexcusable.
We're not going to get split screen with UE5 though, are we? Presumably.
Actually no. I think UE5 does because of look at Fortnite. Fortnite has been able to, which uses,
but
I know much less demanding.
Of...
Yes, absolutely. But having said that, that was something that was patched in after the UE5 switch. So and that does split screen on lower powered consoles as well and scales quite well. I do think there's precedent for like the cross-play and multiplayer side of things in the engine. It's there.
What one concern people have is because I think UE5 has issues with frame rates generally.
Right.
Is that
optimization.
They need to keep 60 frames with Halo. That's non-negotiable.
Yes. No, it's all about the feel. It's all about the feel. And then if you're gonna pitch it as this platform, because don't forget that's what they referred to Infinite as, is sort of a platform for Halo to build on. You then have to have the studio infrastructure that supports a proper live service game. I hope it isn't. I hope they just have multiplayer and they don't do seasons. I don't need that. I don't need another live service game to vie for my attention. Put it as a premium product. Put it in Game Pass. Obviously day one. But have it all in there. Don't launch unless it's ready. But get it ready for launch. For like a next-gen console launch. Premium product. You buy to get into it. And just release new maps every few months. Just do it like that. Just do chunks. Just do map packs like the old school, approach. It doesn't need to be seasons.
I would have campaign completely separate, so separate that the multiplayer releases at a completely different time to the single player. There's no need to. I don't know why you would coincide them because you split the player base instantly.
You do, but I think that risks for me making it feel like Infinite's being like, oh, this is like a piecemeal release and it's not ready. Halo, you played. Think about the original Halos. You had the campaign waiting for you that you played with your mates. And then the multiplayer was there, ready for you when you were done with that. You just want it there. You don't want to be fucking around. I don't know
how many people
delayed releases.
You have like Halo multiplayer fans and you have Halo single player fans, and there was a crossover. The same way you have Call of Duty. The people in the middle of that Venn diagram that play both is quite small. I think.
I don't know that. I think for Halo that crossover is massive. It's Call of Duty that would be like. They have the much more dedicated towards multiplayer than single. Halo always struck me, or maybe I'm obviously biased to my own experience of it, but I always I held the campaign and multiplayer in equal regard. In that was Halo for me. Co-oping the campaign, shooting people online, like that was the experience.
I kind of agree. In my opinion, I like to have time to dedicate to either mode. Fair. I don't like feeling my split between, especially when you're trying to keep up with people on multiplayer and you've got like this massive campaign
which you're playing
really
again
engaging campaign
in co-op as well. Like that's tough to balance that time.
So maybe not like like Rockstar do. They release the game and then a few months later sometimes they release the multiplayer when people have had time to play through the single player. Like I quite like that approach.
Yeah, there was actually, I remember a Call of Duty game that did that. I think one of the Modern Warfare reboots released a campaign first, and I think it was the second game. And I destroyed that campaign. It was a week before multiplayer came out. Just a week, just 7 days in advance. And I loved that. I completed the
Yeah,
campaign. My first Call of Duty campaign completed actually in a decade because it was out a week before the multiplayer. So, but yeah, there's definitely precedent for that. I would then argue that I'd want to have the single multiplayer in the package day one. It is a feature-complete Halo game. Prove that Halo Studios can launch a Bungie-style feature-complete Halo game. But the season, if they go with seasonal updates, doesn't start for like the first couple weeks. So before we get into the ranked play and the maps maybe being updated or the new modes being added, it's just kind of the base game launch, like season 0 almost. It launches in that state, and then a couple weeks in, then we get our regular updates, if that's the approach they end up taking with it.
it does make it a lot easier to release games more quickly though if you don't put the pressure on them to do both those things at the same time. You can also basically have separate teams, a team developing a multiplayer, because they're very, very different. The multiplayer in Infinite doesn't really feel anything like, well, it's got the Halo feel, but the maps and things are very,
No,
very
they're their own
distinct
thing,
from
aren't they? Essentially.
and you've got also something people are talking about is Forge, going to be very, very hard to recreate in UE5, whereas they've got that. I'm sure it's technically possible, but they've had that in their engine for so long.
Yes, and heavily
I think we might have
on.
to expect that might not come back. Certainly not in the short term.
It is certainly in its previous form. I think, as we often pretend to do, if we're the executives we've got the money hat. I think to shut 343 and kill Halo as a brand would have been a huge mistake. Doing what they've done on paper has, I think now, even though I don't like the way it was delivered, I think it has set them up with the best possible chance for Halo to find success again. New engine, new management, multiple games in development. That's what they need. They needed to make some big swings, so I can't knock them for that. I don't like the way it was announced, and I wish we'd had a product to attach our interest to. But I think the big swings, and especially the engine switch, I do think the UE5 switch is going to be massively beneficial for them and their future.
Yeah, I wonder if they thought this would leak or something, because it's weird that
Oh,
you
yeah.
wouldn't do it at the Game Awards or something. I mean, it's not long to wait to, and
Yeah.
they could have made some. They must have an idea. Let's say it's Combat Evolved remake. They could have just put together, because they basically got the assets there.
Yeah.
You could have just re-edited that with the Halo music over the top
And the logo
a
at
few
the
extra
end.
bits
Yeah.
and the logo at the end, and that would have gone down incredibly
Yeah.
at the Game Awards. And instead, we had this weird developer update thing.
Yeah, a missed opportunity to generate some intense hype for that. I think that was a waste.
And I just wanted to cover this because it really is getting on my nerves. They have certain developers. I think in this case, it's like the chief of staff at Halo Studios, who's like a black woman, and she's got like alternative kind of hair, and people have been going on her LinkedIn, and she's got like the like rainbow banner on her LinkedIn, and people are like, oh, this is who we've got in charge of Halo, and they've been going through her career history and saying, how's this woman got to be chief of staff or whatever at 343 or Halo Studios? And it's just like, this is the problem that we have, and we've been talking about it with Outlaws and Assassin's Creed, and it feels like we're talking about it every week. People you get a trailer announcement, and certain subsets of the community are just waiting to jump on about anything.
Automatic hate.
Yeah, and it's terrible, and it
is.
It's
and boring.
To be fair, this was a risk of when you have a developer led announcement like this, and I think I've not been a fan of Microsoft's generally, and I think that it's good in one sense that you're putting developers at the forefront, but I think that you are opening up the teams to a lot of hate from parts of the community, and also pressuring teams when you have this level of engagement with the community. And we've seen it with Assassin's Creed, and they've kind of changing the game in response to community feedback, which I'm not sure is the right thing to do. So yeah, I putting team members in front of the internet like that is, I'm sure they all volunteered to do it, but it opens them up to hate, and I think it's all unwarranted. Obviously, we have no idea who these people are. We have no idea, you know.
Well,
she's not going to be saying, oh, we need to change the characters in the game. She's completely unrelated. She's in human resources, which is where absolutely you need people aware of diversity and inclusivity
it's
to be.
just a boring issue that continuously reasserts itself all the time when people latch on to an arbitrary issue that they've just decided is now unacceptable, see something they love and tie that love to something they've decided they hate, and allowing that hate to then influence their opinion of a product that doesn't even exist yet. That is just nonsensical to me. And we've addressed it many times, the mistake that some studios make where they bow to that pressure. We're seeing it with Assassin's Creed, potentially, where they reshape their approach because a loud minority has decided that is unacceptable, or historically. I'm sure these people very concerned about historical accuracy when they're saying that they could never be an African American or black samurai in one of these titles. I just cannot get on board with that level of ignorance and stupidity, and it should not be an issue that we still face in 2024. And yet I feel like it is magnified tenfold by social media and people's response to things exactly like this trailer.
If these people ever get a job in a big corporation, they're going to be fucked, because that's just the nature of big businesses nowadays.
Yep.
Like, I'm sure you get some, like maybe in the financial sector and things where they're still quite archaic, but that's what Microsoft is now. That's what Ubisoft is. That's what EA is going to be. That's what Sony, all the big gaming companies. That's who they are. That's who game developers are for the most part now. That's what they want. Let them make the games they want with the people they want working there.
Precisely. My bottom line is it's not about fulfilling a quota. It's who's the best person for the job, and their skill set is not reflected by their skin color or their choice of hair. It doesn't make it. Are they shit at the job or not? You could you could be shit at the job and be any race, gender, or sexuality. So that's it's just who you are.
Yeah, creative people have always been more open-minded and more liberal than people who aren't creative. I think it's natural that in the industry you would have that happen. But I don't know if we want to talk about it going to PlayStation, or if we feel we should wait for more smoke first.
Save it.
But, there's an argument that the PlayStation fans are saying that the reason they've moved to Unreal Engine is so it will be easier to move it to PlayStation. I've seen some people also say because it's 10-year anniversary of Master Chief Collection, it's a good time for that. That's not going to happen, is it? Come on, reassure me. Master Chief Collection. Come on, that I think if that went now, that would be weird. That would be weird. That would be out of the blue.
Can't say for certain that anymore. Nothing is off limits now. I don't think indie would go. So yeah.
Yeah, but it's not Halo, is it?
No, it's not. But it opens the floodgates. And Forza was rumored. Forza goes. You're just putting Forza on the same platform as Gran Turismo. I don't know. I actually think something we hadn't touched upon is switching to Unreal Engine 5 makes them more able to be supported by other first-party studios.
That's very true. Which is the big. I think you're going to get almost every team
playing in
developing on Unreal Engine 5.
Can you imagine the coalition weighing in with Halo Studios? I would love to see their little hands get involved in that and have that influence felt, because they are market leaders in Unreal Engine and have proved it time and again in the previous versions of their Gears games. E-Day, by the way, I'm so excited for. That is just... there's not been anything new on it. That is rapidly going up my most anticipated list. But I think we see more support for the studio, and easily too.
What other engines are there first party? You've got the Forza engine.
Yes, you've got the
and
Decima.
the Bethesda
Yeah, you got
one.
the Bethesda engine.
Shit.
On the PlayStation side, you've got the Decima engine, which is what's powered Death Stranding and Horizon. It's the Guerrilla Games proprietary engine. So on their side, there's Remedy use Northlight, which is their proprietary engine. So there's a few still knocking about, but UE5 and Unity obviously, but UE5 is definitely the most prevalent. The commercial terms of that are so interesting when they say that they don't charge you for the license use until you've made $1 million in sales.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Very accessible
Yeah.
for indie teams to be able to get on board with that. So
It's interesting. I can't see Bethesda ever moving from their creation engine, even though like it was heavily criticized for Starfield. Hopefully they just modernize it.
Microsoft might pressure them into that if they see good returns from what the Coalition and Compulsion using Unreal Engine 5 for South of Midnight. Fable, I think, is UE5.
No, I think it's the Forza engine.
Oh, it's the Forza engine. Okay, could see that shift if Halo proves
Yeah, I
viability
mean
for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I don't know about racing games in Unreal Engine. I don't know. Yeah, the Bethesda one is an interesting one because certain things in Bethesda games have to, or Elder Scrolls, Fallout, Starfield, you have to be able to drop an item, travel across the world, and go back, and it's still there, and that's quite unique. And people putting potatoes in the airlock and stuff. that is something that you would need to have. It sounds weird, but it's just
It's
like
experimenting with the sandbox is where the mod community is so vibrant over there too, because they're willing.
And
to do that.
the mods is another thing.
And it's
so
how viable that would be. Interesting, you raised it. You mentioned about the performance issue potentially being something. I think the cross play for multiplayer and split screen is embedded there in UE5. Whether that then matches up with performance or it then potentially scales it too much, we end up with sort of perhaps a compromised version because they're having to reduce graphical quality in order to hit those performance metrics. You got to get that 60. You said it best earlier. You need a smooth locked 60 for Halo.
But also it's relatively early days for UE5. So as much as people are saying it's struggling with frame rates at the moment, they'll do improvements to the engine as time goes by as well.
Yeah,
and teams will get better at working with it.
Yeah, and I do think you can look at enough titles like Immortals of Avium, that really struggled with their resolution scaling to hit a frame rate target. I think it's very likely that we see next gen. It's almost like the engine was a gen too early. That we'll see the next gen games really utilizing UE5 in a more optimized sense than what we've seen currently. There's only been a couple of games like the finals that have managed to crack it so far this gen. So I do feel like it was, especially when you look at that Matrix tech demo that they released, it just felt like it was a gen too early. We just didn't quite have the development experience and the understanding of the engine to really use it at its best capacity.
And also, I think we're seeing with PS5 Pro that developers are actually scaling the resolution down so it can be upscaled through
different means.
Was it PSSR or whatever it is on PS5 Pro? So
and we're seeing
will open doors
definitely, and I've seen more games throw in a 40 frames per second option with unlocked frame rate using VRR, because that's becoming a bit more prevalent in PC monitors. Jack, subscribing at tier 1. Subscribe for 3 months. Thank you so much, bud. Great to see you. I just saw a comment from Big Manny that I never acknowledged earlier. Your content is quality and deserves more attention. Thank you, Big Manny. That's so generous.
Absolutely.
And Murdog as well, subscribe with Prime. I did not catch that. Stephen Murray, using a Prime subscription on here as well. What a ledge. Dulcet Tones, available now on YouTube. So, lots to discuss further, I think. There's going to be a few more, certainly in the months and years ahead, plenty more moments where we'll be deep diving on the state of Halo. Anything else you wanted to throw in before we wrap out tonight?
No, I think I've covered everything I wanted to say on it.
Covered the bases. So, ladies and gents, thank you so much for tuning in to the latest episode of System Link. As always, I've been joined by my co-host Mike Hazelton from the Xbox Guide. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Insta, and on all of the other platforms I've just forgotten, YouTube, etc., Spotify, etc., at Burly Bird Media. Mike, where can people find you online?
The main place is the xboxguide.com. There'll be an article this week, hopefully, about Game Pass tiers, which will kind of be the first deep dive that I've done. So, yeah, keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, we'll be back next week, I think.
Yes, please. Yeah, it's locking the System League. We won't be back for Burly Bud Live this weekend just because of some family wedding madness going on, so I'm going to be away. But yes, we'll be back certainly on Wednesday for our next episode of System Link. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
See ya.